Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with the life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Campus Climate Corps' Day 12 daily briefing for COP27. We're so glad to have each and every one of you listening to our broadcast today. As always, just reminding you that we have a live Campus Climate Corps volunteer monitoring our chats. So if you ever have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and we'd be happy to answer them and happy to direct them to one of our folks here on the ground in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. As always, I'm your host, Rock Abujadi Jr., hosting live from Gainesville, Florida. Some big headlines in the news today. President-elect of Brazil, Lula, said that Brazil is back. He attended COP27 today, giving some very startling speeches for many of the folks, especially those back at home in Brazil, where he promised that deforestation of the Amazon rainforest is coming to an end, closing that book completely and permanently on the end of the destruction of our lungs of the world. So I definitely think that that was a pretty big piece of news there. The second big piece of news is that oil companies are pushing back at COP27. As many of you might remember from last year, they were the largest delegation. Oil and gas companies filled out the largest delegation over in Glasgow in Scotland. But this year, they're at COP27, reminding folks that Russia is cutting off oil and gas supplies to the rest of the world, or especially to Europe, and that in order to effect an effective transition, that oil companies like major organizations like OPEC have suggested that they will help fill the gap in those niches, in those areas. Interestingly, though, Saudi Arabia decreased its pledge from 2050 to 2060 in order to get full neutrality or full carbon neutrality. Which definitely was a major step backwards. And then Abu Dhabi, the host of next year's climate conference, COP28, which is also known as the oil capital of the world, was also out there suggesting that they might also backtrack on their climate target emissions closer to 2060, suggesting that maybe Russia's playing a role in that analysis. Anyway, our team on the ground here has some more live interviews. So we're going to turn it over here to Esteban. So Esteban, why don't you give us a little bit of background on some of the interviews you have ready for us today?
Oh, yes. So as we usually do in Campus Climate Corps, we have an interview with a university, and an American university. We have Colorado State this time, who has presence within a framework that englobes various universities from the States and from other countries. And in this case, also Colorado State brought students to actually have a press conference about a particular conservation project. Today is also Biodiversity Day. So this press conference showcases a project to restore, to bring back the American bison to areas where it has been taken away. At the same time, we also have an interesting interview from the US Pavilion. This is related to the 1.7 billion pledge to indigenous communities to protect forests. And the actual panel there had a rocky start, in the sense that the indigenous leaders were emphasizing that while 19% has already been disbursed. Only 7% from that 19% of funds has reached their particular indigenous organizations, whereas the rest is going to intermediaries. That's what one side says. Then we also have an interview with someone from USAID, a senior policy analyst, to bring more detail into that aspect that was brought forth by the indigenous communities.
Absolutely. All right, well, in that case, let's go ahead and get started, see what type of content that they have to share today.
Good afternoon. We are here with Hindu Ibrahim from Chad at the U.S. Pavilion, who has just been a panelist at the Forest Tenure Pledge of 1.7 billion. How do you do? Thanks for having us.
Sure, it's a pleasure. I'm doing well, thank you.
You just spoke at the panel, and we apologize for again asking about this, but would you mind telling our audience at Campus Climate Corps and the Water Keepers Associations about what has been going on with this 1.7 billion pledge? What amount of money has been already invested, and how that money has been distributed?
Sure. So firstly, the climate change impact, it is a reality in our communities. It is not around the report. It is the real life that people are living every single day. Secondly, it was nice last year when they all come and announced 1.7 billion for indigenous peoples solutions. And at the end of the day, we come here in this COP, we realize that already 19% of this money is already invested. That means more than 300 millions. And then the sad thing is, it is only 7% of this money went to the indigenous peoples, around 17 millions. And our question is, where is the 17 millions went? Because we do not know any indigenous organization who said that they receive 1 million or whatever, because it's already like only 1 year. And at the end, the 93% went to the big NGOs, governments, local authorities. So it's not went to the indigenous peoples. They cannot tell us that the indigenous peoples are the solution makers, and they commit the money on our names, and then the money ending up again to the big organizations. So this is not a direct access funding. For us, we work in 10 principles. Through them, we say the direct access funding might be the money that can go directly to our communities, to fund our initiatives, to our own organizations. And if there is need of the intermediary organization, we can choose who are the intermediary organization that we want to work with them, but not imposing one. And also, the money cannot tackle one ecosystem. It can tackle all the ecosystem together. We cannot only choose the forest and left the savannas. We cannot choose the savannas, left the glaciers or the mountain. So we need to tackle all the ecosystem together.
Has this been a pattern that you have seen recurrent among initiatives of this type?
Sorry?
Has this pattern been repeated in initiatives of this type in the past?
Most of the initiatives are tackling only one ecosystem. And let us be honest, we are all aware that it is important to protect a tropical forest. But the most important is end all the commodities around the tropical forest. It is very simple. Don't say that we are going to invest money to protect it if you do not caring about the existing primary forest in the tropical forest, in Amazon, in Congo Basin, in Indonesia, in all the places. If you stop all the deforestations, I think you can protect it more. Then invest on the glaciers protections. Invest in the savannas in order to keep people there to do not go and invade the ecosystem of the tropical forest. Invest in the oases and people can stay there. They cannot just come to the savannas. And invest on the indigenous peoples directly. So don't repeat the same thing who never worked for more than 30 years.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. We're here with Lauren Baker, Senior Policy Analyst for USAID. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you.
Can you give our audience a little bit of the context of the 1.7 billion fund to protect?
There seems to be some issues with the audio on that one. Esteban, why don't you go ahead and summarize that interview if you can?
Well, it's particularly difficult to summarize. So it's either I know that the sound is not good, but it might be worth listening to it. Essentially, one of the points she made was that yeah, there are legal constraints to how taxpayer dollars are administered. And though there have been some efforts in making the process more accessible, it's yeah, it's still particularly difficult. But yeah, it's a long interview. It's 9 minutes.
Fair enough. Why don't we just go back to that first interview? I was rather surprised that most of the finances that was earmarked to head towards indigenous communities clearly wasn't making it there. And you listened to her talk just prior to the interview, right?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Did she mention where she mentions that some big NGOs were sucking up most of the money? Was there any names in there that she dropped? Any big, large NGOs in the area that were taking up more of the money that was earmarked for indigenous communities?
They didn't give names. So yeah, it's particularly yeah, we would have to trace that, and I tried to have interviews with other members of the panel, but yeah, they just went away pretty fast. But it does seem like an issue for the field of political ecology. It does look like a textbook example from political ecology on how it's very difficult to couple the ways that of allocating funds in some countries to other countries, right? I don't know how. We had an issue with the sound. We don't know exactly what it is. There is quite an amount of noise here. As far as we know, from the second interview, it is understandable, but yes, every once in a while you have that interference.
That's fine. I'm actually curious about Val Holly. You are from an indigenous community, so I'm curious about what you think about the idea of money being earmarked for indigenous communities to help, finance, climate change efforts in the area. What do you think, or what do you have to say about the idea that, millions are being earmarked for, local indigenous communities that are simply not making it there?
Yeah, it's definitely been a big issue, and I've heard about it at like just about every indigenous talk I've attended here. And it just seems kind of perfect. Like, it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Because there's always this notion that COP is some big place where so much action is taken, and this is going to be the answer, and this is where the answers are going to be created and be implemented. And it's hard to believe that a bunch of governments and fossil fuel companies can get together and they can actually solve the climate crisis. So the fact that we have these amazing pledges coming out that literally $1.7 billion to indigenous communities, and barely any of the money is being directly received by these communities, it just makes sense in my mind. Like, I'm not sure why it's happening, where that money is going, but it seems like that must be very typical in a lot of the agreements that happen here. And especially when it comes to indigenous communities, there's a long history of governments screwing them over and not upholding their end of the deal. So it's nothing new to indigenous communities, but it's definitely disheartening to see it happening still today. But hopefully, speaking up about it, we'll actually see some progress made in getting these funds directly to the communities. But it is interesting that she pointed out that nobody has really heard from any of the indigenous communities that they've been getting like millions of dollars. And to talk a little bit about when you were asking if there were any direct names given, it reminded me of the interview from yesterday that Esteban showed with the man who was saying that he couldn't name these names, like he couldn't say World Bank by name because he wasn't allowed to. And for some people, it puts them in danger. Um, and that's what that reminded me of. So I assume even if you did ask, it would be hard to get direct names. But all of it seems very classic and is definitely nothing to be surprised by. But it is a shame that stuff like this is still happening and not that many people seem to care.
Absolutely. In fact, I was rather surprised that she had a platform to speak on at COP27 to highlight the issues to highlight this case. It is a rather large commitment by the United States and by USAID. And for most of that money to actually not be received by the intended recipients speaks to me a lot about, some of the major issues that we are still currently tackling that are kind of reminiscent about what we've been dealing with throughout history. Anyway, we're moving on to our second interview for the day. Okay. Second interview of the day. Right here. All right.
Good morning. We're here at the Colorado State Pavilion with Natalie Wiley, Ashley Pataxil Hardin, and Crystal Dominguez Vasquez, 3 grad students at Colorado State University. Hi, thanks for having us.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us.
So the first question that we have for you is, what's the purpose of this association of universities that actually showcase in this particular pavilion?
Yeah, so these universities are coming together through the YEA Network, which stands for Youth Environmental in Higher Education Coalition Network. And so all higher education institutions are participating to send youth like us, such as ourselves, to the COP conference in order to lend our voices as well as absorb as much information as we can to bring that into our own, for our own future careers and climate action as we navigate through this in our life and in our journey together. So it's been really awesome. We've been able to do a lot with institutions, with just doing press conferences and collaborating with other institutions across the world.
Fantastic. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about curricula at Colorado State that it's particularly targeted towards climate change and your particular fields of study.
So I'm particularly getting a professional science master's. It's more of a master's degree to get us in more vocational roles. I study greenhouse gas accounting and lowering carbon emissions either through operational sustainability, through corporations, through like greener technology, or through soil carbon, like in agricultural emissions. And there I am learning how to do coding and environmental modeling that assesses emissions, and then we essentially create sustainability plans to lower them. And I would say that's a great way to help the environment, the climate crisis. I really feel like that's my best way to do as much action as possible.
Marvelous. And what's your field of study?
I study ecosystem science and sustainability with Crystal right here. And this is our first year actually. And I'm taking a bunch of carbon classes, and it's actually really interesting learning about just how carbon dioxide affects the environment.
Yeah, with that, we are investigating pollinators in national parks and how they're being affected by climate change, so we can better protect the biodiversity in our national parks.
Marvelous. And within campus, are there any measures being put in place to cut carbon emissions?
Actually, within my program, we also require an internship, and I was fortunate enough this last summer to do an internship on campus through the College of Business, in a specific sector where I did, again, a greenhouse gas inventory. I did an analysis of how much emissions they are producing through their operational practices, and then I created a sustainability audit where they created a green team, and they are now employing these emission reduction strategies that I recommended to them, and so they're currently lowering their emissions as we speak, and I think that's a great initiative.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I've been told you just had a press conference and today is Biodiversity Day. Can you tell us a little bit about the content of your press conference?
Yeah, so we did a case study on Sustainable Development Goal 15, which stands for Life on Land, and specifically target 15.5, which was to help protect a threatened species by 2020. And so we consider this a success story because the soapstone bison was reintroduced in 2015 with only 10, and they were the most closely genetically alike to bison in the pre-colonization era, which is very important for indigenous cultures and those peoples. And so as of today, there are 120 bison as well, and so right now they're thriving, and that's why we call it a success story. And I think you could touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely important cultural, it was super culturally significant to the indigenous tribes that were the most impacted by bison throughout history. And to have their participation in the reintroduction of soapstone bison was absolutely monumental for them. And I think it genuinely just was an amazing collaborative effort that we were able to highlight in this press conference and talk about what was happening there. And I think it's really awesome that so many people came together at the table, talked about it, not just scientists, but in tribal communities as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think a lot of credit for this research should go to Dr. Jennifer Barfield at Colorado State University. She is the geneticist that was able to help diversify their gene pool and help wash embryos essentially of a bacterial disease that affected bison populations. And there's also a PhD holder, Kate Wilkins, who was a major contributor to this project as well. And I feel like they deserve a lot of the credit for the work that we just had the opportunity to highlight.
Wonderful. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's always inspiring to see other students on the ground over at these events. I mean, I remember when I attended in Morocco and Bonn, Germany, there was almost no students present at those events. More so in Paris, but of course that was the Paris climate commitments. But of course, now even in Glasgow, there's a significant amount of students attending that event. But I am curious, how many other students is everyone seeing on the ground over there? Or are those, the exception to the rule?
Quite a lot, I would say, or at least people that are perhaps just graduated. That's also common. You can see quite an amount of young faces at COP, independently of what happened at COI. It would seem that the trend is changing, fortunately, and I hope we can see that in years to come.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's that time of the day, Michael, to make me very jealous about what's going on over at COP. So I'm just curious, how many photos were you able to get today, and what kind of interesting content do you have to showcase?
Well, I made sure that I'll make you jealous, so just let me prepare my images all together, and I hope that there will be few of them that will make you jealous. I'm pretty sure there are some out there.
You never fail to, I'll put it that way.
Well, I made it sort of a mission of my day today, get these images to show them and make Rock jealous.
Absolutely.
Let me share my screen, and here we go. That would be the first image of the day. It was a different crowd of protesters who welcomed the participants today. It's a different crowd, but the message is basically the same. And the fossil fuels now keep it in the ground, keep the temperature 1.5 or below. The slogan was 1.5 to survive. 1.5 to survive, and so on and so on. I think it was also a group of doctors who were basically having the Earth as their patient, and they were doing a little performance there. And this is how they were standing and having their arms in the hand, like this. I walked a few of the rooms, and it seemed that there are also signs of things getting a little more open or a little loose, because some of the slogans on the posters were displayed on the stage. I have not seen this approach previously. This was the first day when I saw it was kind of open like that. People were also drawing some of their banners, carrying them around. Obviously, as every year in every COP I have been to, the Sustaina Claus showed up. So that's we have seen here many times. He delivers his interviews all the time at every single COP. So it's a special character, part of COP every year. Then my attention caught this lady, who basically set up a little table with her banners, and then she really enjoyed being photographed. The crowd liked her. She got my attention by the color of her hair. I watched her for a while, and she really enjoyed the crowd taking photos of her. We might have seen this statistics yesterday. It's the number of participants at this COP. It shows about 33,500. And this number does not include participants registered with the badge types of host country, party overflow, and so on. So roughly there are 50,000 people at this COP. And I truly enjoy just walk by and look at these people, because there are special characters. It's sometimes very unusual. It's so colorful, like this gentleman working on his laptop, just laying there on the ground. So I kept walking, was taking more photos of these people, and then bumped into this gentleman. So obviously that's the John Kerry, the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. So I followed him, just like the crowd of other people. They were trying to get selfies with him. He was very professional. He took few of them and then started to go on his nerves, but there was his security, so they did a very professional job. Yet, as Esteban always says, the journalists they are a crowd of merciless people. So the journalists were following him and giving him the mic right in front of the mouth. And no, he is not punching here somebody here. He was just giving high five to somebody who was standing right next to me. So it looks like he was punching already journalist away, but no, that's not the case. Then we eventually end up in the US Center, where John Kerry was announcing the first cohort of countries to endorse the Ocean Conservation Pledge at COP27. So I had plenty of time to take well-focused images and framed images like the way I wanted. As soon as he was done with the speech, he left and went to another meeting, and again the journalists just kept following him. I felt sorry for him, but well, it's part of the job. Then I walked towards the main plenary room, which was completely empty today. So they allowed me in, and I had plenty of time to take photos there. So I was slowly making my steps towards the main stage, getting closer to the spot, and then here is the spot. This is the place. Getting there, well, I was kind of bored of taking photos there, but eventually I end up at this spot. This is the spot where all the prime ministers and presidents deliver the main speech there. So this is the spot where Biden was standing 2-3 days ago and delivering her speech. It was very empty, only few people there, but whoever got in was trying to get a photo like that. So the gentleman A on the left is taking a photo of gentleman B behind the microphone, and then they had to shift it. So gentleman B is taking an image of gentleman A, and so on. So few people were going there, and then it somehow they were touching the microphone that long that it stopped working. So then some technical crew came and said, "Oh, it was you, or maybe it was you." So what they did was they went to the back, they fixed some cables, and then it started working again. I think the reason why it's, well, we'll get to that in a second. I just want to show 3 more photos of the tables where the delegates sit. So I picked 3 countries. The United States, they sit in the very back. They don't have a very good view. The Czech Republic is in the third row. Well, me as a Czech, if I was a delegate, I would have much better view. And obviously, the best view gets Argentina because it's alphabetically ordered. Actually, right next to Argentina is Armenia. They have the very best view. So it's an alphabetical order. So being from Argentina, Esteban, one day maybe you end up here and you get the very best view of all the delegates there. This is once again an image of the spot, and why it was empty. The plenary room, some of the sessions got cancelled today because there was a reception, which is unfortunately by an invitation only, so I didn't get a chance to get there. So that's where the heads of the delegations and the high-level segment delegates go to. So it's sort of a garden party. I didn't get a chance to go there. Took few images just in the back to give you a sense how a garden party might look like. Here would be an image how I think the reception might look like. It would be relaxed. There might be some bilateral discussions. This one was between Iraq and Jordan, just in the area prior going to the reception. And as the day was ending, I end up in this section. I have seen it for the first time. It seemed to be arranged like a Bedouin camp, and people were really relaxed there. They were giving each other massages, drinking tea, drinking coffee, just very relaxed discussions. There was a beautiful sunset today. So a nice ending of the day. And this is the very last image of today. The people in this pavilion, they had their display there, but they had it rotated by 90 degrees and weren't able to figure out how to rotate it so it shows properly. And I think it might be sort of an image which shows we need to do something about climate change. Maybe we just need to change the perspective. In this image, they change it incorrectly, but maybe there is a hope in changing our view on the issue of climate change. And with being that said, I'm turning back to you.
Thanks, Michael. At the very least, you didn't turn any photos, so I had to turn my head this way.
I was thinking about it, but then decided to play.
Yeah, we don't want any of our viewers trying to adapt their faces that way. But thank you, Michael, as always. Excellent photography. Definitely got the objective done. Made me jealous. We have an interesting question in the chat. Is anyone getting arrested? Have any of you seen any actual protests that got violent, or anyone that is actually being held back in any sort of capacity here? I remember last year at COP26, there was quite a few arrests, and even Michael got a little bit of a ticket about getting searched. But I don't think anything's happening over at COP27. Esteban, Valhalla, have either of you seen anyone getting pushed around or any kind of, anything resembling violence?
I haven't seen any arrests here, but also we haven't seen that many protests to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's
well,
just
let me also step in here. I'm sitting in the media or the press center, and we are sitting right next to the room where the Brazilian president was doing his announcement maybe an hour ago. And it's I was already working on the photos and videos, and it's just right here 10 meters from me. We are on the first floor so we can see it easily. But there was being some noise because people were gathering, and it seemed that there might be something going on. So all the journalists ran there right to the balcony to see what was happening, and then it calmed down or very quickly. And then all we could hear was just some little protest during the speech, but there was also a lot of clapping after all as well.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Really does go to show how close everyone is to the center of the action here. Thanks, Michael. Next, we have Jeffrey Dismukes. I believe this is the first time that we have you here on the program. I am curious about your personal thoughts regarding COP27. You did not attend week 1, but you are now attending week 2. So be curious to hear how somebody who is just now experiencing COP for the first time has any sort of, immediate first thoughts regarding the conference. So Jeff, welcome so much to the program. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks so much, Rock. Yeah, like you say, this is, I've just joined the group this week and for the second week, and this is also my first attendance at COP. And so I did want to just share some of my first impressions, and I have a few photos here. If I can share my screen, we'll look at photos. So the first thing that really struck me is that how large the event is. I would estimate it's really about between 15 and 20 square city blocks. And so the first thing you're greeted with are these maps. And I have done GIS my whole career, and so I'm fairly capable of reading a map, but these maps I found completely useless and very confusing because the buildings themselves didn't have any indication of what was on the map. Like they weren't really lettered or anything like that. And so the map was all in section letters, and then the buildings didn't really have the letters.
Hey Jeff, are you currently sharing any photos or something?
Yeah, you don't see those?
No. So if you'll just hit your share screen at the very bottom and then choose the image you want to share with us.
Hold on one second. Sorry.
Yeah, we all are. Eventually Zoom does it does take us all down eventually.
Not sure why it isn't. I'm sharing the screen now. Oh, this is too bad. This worked earlier. I'm not sure why it's not working. Oh, here, I see what's happening. Maybe not.
There should be a big green button on the oh, wait a minute.
That? Now you see it?
I see your screen. I don't see the pictures just yet.
Here we go. Okay, yeah. And
okay,
so
there we go. There we go.
This was the original photo that I was talking about, the maps that were just, you know, not very useful and in fact, very confusing. And so, and like I was saying, it's a huge event and covers a lot of space, and all the buildings have beautiful murals on the outside. And one of the things I was trying to figure out here, because this is my first attendance and I've attended a lot of academic conferences, is what exactly is going on. You know, it's hard. It kind of encompasses a lot of different things. So it's a unique conference event to anything I've ever experienced. One of the things I notice is there's some wonderful glitzy displays and large screen video displays, and so they put a lot of effort into the glitz and glamour of it all. The next thing you notice is these banks of air conditioning that stretch as far as the eye can see, and I found that a little unfortunate because actually the weather here has just been fantastic. We've had weather highs in the mid 70s, and so you're really comfortable outside, and you walk into these buildings and they're freezing cold. So we're, you know, spending a lot of energy budget on the event. And then, like I said, I thought it was going to be a science conference, but there's really very little of that. There's a few scientific poster displays, and then this is in front of the plenary sessions that there really wasn't a whole lot of attendance at the plenary sessions when I was there too. So then I started walking around a lot of the country pavilions, and each country is giving examples of how their country is contributing to new technologies, new industrial applications to combat the climate crisis. And they're having all these sessions going on also with very little attendance, and that kind of seemed like a trade show to me. So it's kind of a scientific conference trade show, but there wasn't a whole lot of people there, and I'm wondering, well, where is the action at this conference? There wasn't a whole lot of people at the plenary sessions. There wasn't a whole lot of people viewing posters. And then I walked outside into the food court and realized, that's where everybody is. And there, I overheard a lot of discussions, nothing about climate, but a lot of people talking about how bad the food was compared to Madrid or compared to Glasgow, and the bathrooms didn't have soap and this sort of thing. And so I started thinking, what is this really all about? Is it true that, like people are saying, is this really just a bunch of greenwashing and a bunch of posing with people coming and going in their fancy limousines, and you see a plane overhead every 5 minutes, a jumbo jet landing or taking off? Then I stumbled across a very small kiosk in a kind of remote area that I thought was very interesting and gave me a lot of hope. One, that it could give answers to these questions about greenwashing, and that is the UNFCCC archives. And this is a project under the UN, but not funded by the UN. So they're currently looking for funding, but it's a very ambitious project where they are going to archive everything from the conferences going back to 1992. They had a really cool display of all the swag dating back to 1992 from all the swag bags from the different conferences. And they are opening this to the public. They expect and hope to be done by 2026. But just to get an idea of how massive this project is, they are digitizing 1.7 million pages of written documents, not including all the VHS tapes from the 90s, and even the digital material, including PowerPoint presentations and everything like that. And it's all going to be available to the public at unfccc.org/archives. And I thought that's actually a really good resource for people to, delve into this data set and answer some of the questions as far as where the conference has gone from the beginning, how expectations have changed. Have we lived up to the expectations? Is it getting more and more greenwashed as we go along? And then also the original idea for the project was just to give the conference the ability to evaluate itself every year and see what kind of improvements it could make. Like I said, that hasn't quite come to fruition yet because they're still working on the digitizing, but they do have some stuff up. So the other really cool thing about this, I thought, is that, instead of all of us traveling on these jumbo jets and a lot of us arriving in limousines, not us, of course, but a lot of the delegates and everything arriving and leaving by limousines, and air conditioning the desert, we can actually glean all of the important information from these conferences online. And this is a poster that points out what the project is doing, as well as points everybody to their web address, which is again unfccc.org/archives. And they're currently looking for funding. I felt that it was unfortunate that they're under the UN Secretariat, but they do not receive funding. So that's basically my impression. Was it's very overwhelming, but also there is some hope for this virtual idea of that we're trying to promote, of being able to attend virtually.
Absolutely. Anyone who has been a member or have seen any of our content over the years, Campus Climate Corps, have known that we've always stressed the idea of virtual participation at these COP events. Whereas instead of sending a group of 30 students overseas, it's much easier, much better than to simply remove or to glean the content and then simply rebroadcast and share it. All right, Jeff, I may have you stop the screen share. There we go. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate all of the content today, all those pictures. But yeah, like I was mentioning, anyone who's seen Campus Climate Corps content over the years, you know that all of us, we like to broadcast all of our content to you, the listener, to you, the viewer, bringing you all the information from COP27, and then asking you to share your thoughts and impressions as we take it back to each of these COP conferences. Anyway, our next piece of content is actually going to come from Dr. John Capiz, and we'll wrap it up for the day. So without further ado, I'll let Dr. Capiz take it away.
So, Energy Day at COP27. I took in two presentations, one at the Swedish pavilion and the other at the Tajikistan pavilion. But before I talk about that, I wanted to go over the map that I presented earlier at the beginning of COP that showed the participating nations, or at least the nations that had pavilions at COP27. Now, what I'm showing here in green are the nations that have their own dedicated national pavilion, and there are 63 of those. And then the nations shown in yellow are participating through regional pavilions. And perhaps the most notable of those is the Nordic pavilion. That's always a very active area with a lot of good information. That's primarily Norway, but it includes the other Scandinavian nations as well. Then Africa is covered by a couple of regional pavilions, so they're included. But you can still see that even with the updated information, we're up to a total of 147 pavilions. And then there are some small booths that are free to small organizations, and there are about 30, 35 of those, and you get those for a week. So there's about 70 participants there. So between the 147 pavilions and the 70 booths, we've got about 217 overall exhibitors this year. That's quite a few. But you can see who's not here. You've got the Russia, sort of Central Asia region down through Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And then you've got Mexico down through much of Central America, and then large part of South America absent, and then a few nations over here in Southeast Asia absent. But pretty good turnout, good representation from most of the nations. As far as the number of people attending this COP, it's a big one. Total of 33,500, and that's split between the official national delegations of the parties, in other words, the Conference of Parties, the actual signatories to the agreement, over 16,000 of their representatives. And that's balanced by primarily the observer organizations, almost 12,000 of them, and then about 3,300 press people. So quite a few media folks here at this conference. Now, the presentation at the Tajik Pavilion was interesting. It was about climate change and its impact upon migration. And particularly they were focusing on Central Asia migration and some of the issues in Tajikistan. Tajikistan is interesting in that it's a nation that receives a disproportionate amount of its income. Its GDP is derived from its young men outside the country working in other nations and sending money home. For a couple of years there, they were the country that had the largest proportion of their GDP from remittances overseas. So small audience, just a few people in attendance, mostly people associated with the Tajik Pavilion and a few others of us. So it was rather easy for me to have conversations with the people because they were all wondering what the heck I was doing there, since very few other people were participating. Now, the first speaker was Banerjee, and he is responsible in Europe, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, and Central Asia for migration. There's actually an international organization for migration, and he's leading up a lot of these efforts. So clearly, the international community is seeing that migration for various reasons is ramping up, and they're trying to get a handle on it before it gets completely out of hand. He said that there was the expectation of 5 to 8 million people in Central Asia moving because of climate change, but the place that's really threatened by this is Africa, and they can anticipate upwards of 85 million in a climate crisis. Now, the primary speaker was this gentleman, Sultan Reza Morzoda from Tajikistan, and he has a lot of responsibility in Tajikistan for water issues. And he talked about how Tajikistan generates 66% of the water for the entire region of Central Asia. So it has a lot of mountains, a lot of glaciers, and a lot of glacial melt. And 93% of Tajikistan is mountainous, and only 7% is available for habitation and agriculture. And he was quite proud of the fact that since 2005, they've increased the number of people in Tajikistan with access to water and sanitation from 50% up to 70%. And he also told a story about how entire villages move when something as basic as an irrigation pump fails. They have no resources to fix it themselves, and they hardly even harass the government into doing it. But eventually the government figures out that there's a problem there, and they repaired the pump, and the entire village a year later moved back. So they had an entire village evacuate their community because of an irrigation failure, and then return once it was taken care of. Amazing story. Now, Dr. Kumari from the World Bank was talking about some of the drivers of climate migration. And she said that water is the primary factor. They've developed simulation models for various scenarios that might put people into motion. And they pointed out that water is the primary stressor that makes people move, because it has cascading effects through the economy and creating social disorder. So it's a primary issue that has to be addressed. Now, this fellow was promoting a water conference that's going to be held in Tajikistan in 2023. And he was also discussing how they're having trouble getting water issues addressed formally in the negotiations of this COP and other COPs, but that we're making progress on the issue. So it was an interesting presentation. I had some interesting conversations with the people afterward, and looking forward to going back there and visiting with them again. Now, the Swedish Pavilion, that was a presentation about water and agriculture as well. And it was a small group, few Egyptians in attendance, and a few other folks. The Egyptian representative was talking about how the majority of water use in Egypt is for agriculture. 80% of all water resources in Egypt are used for agriculture. Now, in a place, say like Florida, where I'm from, and the U.S. in general, it's more on the order of 50%. So 80% is quite high. But then they have a large number of people employed in the agricultural sector, 24% of their entire population. Whereas in a place like the U.S., it's extremely low, something like 2%. And because water is so critical to them, and agriculture is so important, they were discussing renewable energies and how to apply it to agriculture. And they have to drive the cost down to make it affordable for their market and their agricultural industries. And one of the issues is long-term storage. Now, one of the mechanisms for storing solar energy is, in fact, fresh water. If you are fresh water is at a premium, and you rely upon desalination to produce some of your water, then that in effect becomes a mechanism by which during high power availability, you can desalinate large quantities of water and then simply store the water for later use. So any excess power can be utilized in that manner because it's not really time dependent. However, for the other elements of agriculture, your traditional power needs and greenhouse facilities and refrigeration and processing and so on, it does require energy storage. And they were trying to determine at what point the progress on long-term storage of renewable energy, of electricity, would be cheap enough to be applicable in Egypt for agriculture. And they were also discussing a private sector model for this investment, which I'm not sure that an awful lot of countries have taken that route for agriculture, because it's typically agricultural investments on water and infrastructure are a national priority and a shared investment provided by the government. So it was an interesting talk. I'm not sure how what potential they have and at what point the cost of long-term storage will drop low enough to be applicable for their situation in Egypt. But the United States, for its part, I attended a session last year where the head of the U.S. Department of Energy was talking about how the United States, for its part, has taken on that challenge and is setting a goal of within the next 10 years, I guess within the next 9 years now, of driving down the cost of energy storage, long-term energy storage, by 90%. If we achieve that, then that can have a tremendous benefit around the world, not just for the United States, but for places like Egypt where they're facing this challenge. So interesting day today. Had several good visits with people throughout the conference, and looking forward to tomorrow.
Well, as always, thank you, Dr. Capis, for a wonderful explanation there about Energy Day. Anyway, we're now finally at the end of our hour. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning into today's broadcast. As always, it's going to be a tomorrow, at least until next Friday. So please stay tuned as we cover the remaining days of COP. And until then, we're signing off from Gainesville, Florida and Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.